One of the most important themes of spirituality is the integration of an aspect of spiritual experience that is transcendent, the aspect that is insight, enlightenment, liberation, and the aspect that is transformative, that is ethical, effective, practical. These two sides, which have different names and different traditions, make up, comprise, create, produce a full spiritual path. Here we take those two themes and their integration as the basis of the structure of our training. That means that at certain times we emphasize the transcendent aspect, which we call awakening, through silent retreat, through daily meditation, through various overtly spiritual exercises. And there are times that we dedicate ourselves primarily to the transformative aspect, which we call responsibility, the ability to make a positive difference. And we do that through work, through running the organization, learning how to actually achieve things, hold ourselves to commitments, learn effective teamwork, and other overtly worldly activities. Both of them are taken as equally important in the training we do here. However, we create different environments for these two kinds of training, not only in terms of time, but also in terms of space. That means that there are certain places where we give ourselves explicitly to a spiritual practice, other places, other areas of the complex we live in, the center we live at, where we give ourselves to the work. So we have zendos, we have meditation spaces that we go to and meditate. We have an interview room where we discuss the depths of each person's practice. And we hope to have a far more extensive complex soon. The building of it will begin this summer, but we're still attempting to move forward on building the entire complex, the entire meditation complex, so that we can offer the full range of practices here that our current space, frankly, does not allow. We divide the space up in another way. Currently, we have to use a certain main room, the one we're in now, for different activities. So now there's a talk, obviously, and other times we're on our laptops doing work. We are carrying in wood for the wood stove. We're cooking. We are discussing how to deal with tax issues and fundraising problems, etc., etc. This space is and should be primarily for the work, but as I say, since we don't have a sufficient space quite yet, we have to use it for other activities as well, which both impinges upon those activities and impinges upon our effectiveness as an organization. However, there is a third way beyond time and space that we divide up the training. And this third way is something which is quite innovative here, something that we have created, something that's very unusual and which we're very proud of. And we have the sense that it's going to be a major contribution to modern spiritual practice, to the modern monastic life. We think of this as a modern monastery, and we're proud to create this and to offer it to the world. That division is between two groups of people in training. One group prioritizes the transcendent aspect, prioritizes the enlightenment, the insight aspect. And how is that done? It's done by recognizing that, yes, we have our own internal issues. We have past history, problems, past experiences, perhaps even traumas that are not resolved. And they need to be resolved. However, we also have the desire to achieve spiritual insight, to see through the human perspective, to see beyond the human mind, so that we're no longer trapped by the patterns that have caused all those problems, so that we can see beyond them, and in seeing beyond them can become free of them. That freedom, we then believe, we have faith, that freedom will allow us to go back and transform even more deeply, even more effectively. So that while the transformative aspect is set aside for now, by transcending ourselves, by transcending the human, transcending the world, transcending greed and hatred and ignorance, by transcending all of that, cutting through all of that, discarding all of that, by becoming free from all of that, we can then return to it and do an even better job of making that transformation. That means that in the end, we will, at an even deeper level, have social intelligence, emotional intelligence, leadership skills, the ability to be a visionary, contemplative leader. And that is the purpose of this group, to become contemplative leaders. The other group does things very differently, but their goal is also and equally to become contemplative leaders. The goals are the same, but the paths are very different, because in the other group, we take the transformative as the priority. We want to transform ourselves, to make a change within. And then, having done that, we dedicate ourselves to the transcendent. And why? Because we believe that in dedicating ourselves to constructing, producing, sculpting a beautiful, whole, healthy self, beautiful, whole, healthy relationships, a sense of social, emotional, practical leadership, intelligence, by developing that first, by allowing ourselves to work through our history, our patterns, perhaps even our traumas, if that's something that we wish to do. We don't offer a particular program for trauma, but of course we're all dealing with whatever trauma we may have brought in to this day, and so we all have to work with it. If we can, then of course we ourselves work with the trauma as well. In any case, we work with whatever issues we can, and we dedicate ourselves for a time to working through those issues. Because of that, we become more stable internally. We become more capable of seeing things clearly, we become more capable of taking action, and most important, we increase our sense of confidence. Because if we don't have a deep confidence, then when we do dedicate ourselves to transcendence, we won't be able to truly let go. We'll just keep on hitting up against that wall. It's only through a deep sense of confidence that it's possible to completely let go. And that confidence comes from the capability to truly serve, to truly make a positive difference to the world. And so those people who are working within the transformative aspect learn how more and more to make changes in their own internal patterns so that they can make changes in the external patterns of this little community and our larger society. Because of that, they, in giving themselves to that, know, believe, have faith that at some point the transcendent will go even deeper than it could have. Now, it might seem strange. Both of these groups are dedicating themselves, prioritizing a certain aspect of the path with the sense that it will help them to take the other side even further. And it might seem from the outside, well, these two groups must disagree. You must have a lot of fights all the time. People get up and start quarreling immediately at 4 o'clock in the morning. And some people think one thing and the other people think another. But actually, there's nothing contradictory about this at all. And it's very important, one of the most important symbols of what we do here is the symbol of a feedback loop. That there's one thing, and that thing feeds into another thing. That second thing then feeds back into the first thing. So for one group to prioritize transcendence for the sake of transformation, and for the other group to prioritize transformation for the sake of transcendence, is only a contradiction if you fail to see how these two support each other. But in fact, they do support each other, and each of us finds ourselves somewhere on this wheel. Somewhere on this wheel, we find ourselves. And wherever it is on the wheel, that's where we should work. That's where we should do our practice. We shouldn't think that I should be somewhere else on this. We throw ourselves in to whatever we're discovering right now. So these two groups actually work together in harmony, and both of them encourage the other in doing that side so that we can all become effective contemplative leaders. We're aware of what happens when a contemplative leader, or in fact any leader, achieves a degree of transformation, has a sense of, gains the ability to change things, has power, may even have good intent. So let's assume that a person has a great deal of power and good intentions, but they just don't understand how things really work. They don't understand the actual problems in the world, and most significantly, they don't understand the fixations, the selfish qualities of their own mind. These people are often seen as the most evil individuals in history. People have a lot of power, good intent, but aren't able to see what's really happening. And so we see what could happen if this program was only about transforming people. If it was only about bringing them to the point where they had power, they had the intent to do good, they had restructured their patterns according to how they thought they should be, they'd made themselves into the person they thought they should be, and they're able to make other people into the people they think that those other people should be. Such people are actually very dangerous. And we see this through history. As we often say around here, it's very rare. It's very rare that a group of people gets together and proclaims, let's do evil. It happens, but it's very rare. And it doesn't do a lot of damage, even when it happens, compared to those people who get together and, in a state of selfish ignorance, say, let's do good. Let's make the world a better place. How shall we do that? By making the world the way we think it should be. By having an idea about how the world should be and making it be that way. They don't notice that that idea was created by a certain mind. Which mind? The same mind that made the problems in the world in the first place. Therefore, it's essential for us to totally transcend that so that we ourselves are completely free of it. A leader who hasn't transcended that isn't truly trustworthy. And when we say contemplative leaders, what we mean are trustworthy leaders. That's what we mean. That's what we aspire to. We're here to become trustworthy, to discover that which is ultimately trustworthy, and then from that direct experience, embody it in our lives as leaders. So when we say contemplative leaders, we mean trustworthy leaders. When we say trustworthy leaders, we mean trustworthy people, that we become trustworthy. A person who hasn't cut through the mind that got us to where we are today, who's still enslaved by it, who's still mastered by it, a person who hasn't cut through selfishness, a person who hasn't truly cut through selfishness, who still believes that through selfishness we'll find happiness, through selfishness we'll make the world a better place, through conflict we'll improve things. A person who believes that is going to do things which are untrustworthy and damaging, even though they themselves and all the people around them may not believe that, may think that it's the right thing to do, may believe wholeheartedly it's the right thing to do. But if we're going to enter the transcendent aspect of this training, then we have the humility to understand that what we think is the right thing to do may not be the right thing to do. And we need to find a standpoint beyond all standpoints from which to see what we're doing. That has nothing to do with selfishness and therefore the motivated reasoning that comes from the constant desire to grab onto personal happiness. Therefore, the people who are in the transcendent side of the training are pushed very hard, very strictly, to cut through any sense of self, and there's very little sympathy given to them, and therefore we sometimes call them the strive and die group. Because we're asking them to strive for transcendence and to die to themselves, that the sense of self is cut through completely. However, we also know that when certain contemplative leaders, as to say leaders, only achieve transcendence, which is to say that they now have happiness independent of conditions, happiness that's independent of self, independent of world, when they have that deep happiness, then it's not at all uncommon. Sadly, it's not at all uncommon for those people to become to appear to themselves and others to be beyond ethical norms. So we see spiritual leaders do things which shock us. We can't believe that they would do that. Aren't they supposed to be enlightened, we ask? And it would seem to them, to others, that they are enlightened. And in fact, in general, they have had very significant insights. More significant insights. They have more wisdom than a lot of people who we think of as better spiritual leaders than they are. So what happened? What's the problem? The problem is that they haven't yet done the deep transformational work, haven't yet worked through the deep patterns. And they become free, they become liberated, but those patterns keep functioning. Those patterns keep having impacts, and because they now have such charisma, are so powerful in terms of their social impact, those patterns actually often gain even more control over the situations they're in and the people they interact with. The Buddha was clear that there is such a thing as wrong liberation. He talked about liberation, right liberation, but he said that there's such a thing as wrong liberation. Wrong liberation means that our liberation is not based on the purification that comes through the constant work for our own ethical improvement. So this is very dangerous for a contemplative leader, to attain insight without either having previously worked through their own internal issues or without being in a situation where they are forced to work through their own internal issues. If that doesn't happen, then they can become much more damaging than they think, the people around them think. And a great deal of the distrust now for spiritual leaders comes from the fact that we see this happen again and again. Nowadays, the people who we think of as our spiritual leaders or the entities that we think of as our spiritual leaders, which are both the scientists and the algorithms of the modern day. We get our information from our gurus of today. We've completely given up on the idea that they should be ethical. There's no sense that those people who we deeply trust to tell us what's true, there's no sense that they should be ethical. If a scientist discovers something and they are ethical, and the experiments show that that's true, then that's true. We all think it's true. If they behave in unethical ways, it doesn't have any impact on the truth of their theory. We say, well, it's still equally true. So we've actually given up now. We've gotten to that point. We've given up on the idea that our gurus, our leaders, should have ethical standards as one of the qualifications for giving us advice. It's a terrifying situation we're in, and we're dealing with that terrifying situation because it's driving us as a species towards increasingly destructive behaviors, and here we are engaged in one of the most destructive phases in the history of life on this planet. We are destroying life at a rate that is incomprehensible to us, and each day killing countless living things for the sake of our own greed, primarily, but also hatred, and this is all based on ignorance. So we need to deal with that, and the leaders who we create are the ones who need to do that. And the way they need to do that is by, yes, cutting through selfishness, but also cutting through the patterns that continually create the same negative consequences. The last that I'll mention is actually the least problematic. That is a person who has insight and then just disengages from the world. This is actually quite rare, but it does happen. People have an insight and then go live in a cave somewhere. And we can say, well, so what? They're not doing any good. Well, that's true. They might not be doing a lot of good for other people. I would say that they're doing some, absolutely. They're doing a certain amount, and they're certainly not doing much damage. And most of us should have humility around this and acknowledge that while we may be doing some good, we may also be doing some damage. And so each of us has to look at ourselves carefully. But we do strive for even more than a person who has an insight, discovers how to be utterly happy, and then spends the rest of their days away from society. On the contrary, we attempt to continue to have, through compassion, a positive impact on society. So, we're aware of the importance of spiritual leaders, contemplative leaders, trustworthy leaders, leaders who have worked on themselves, leaders who are capable of having an impact on the world, being engaged and making a difference. And we believe that the creation of contemplative leaders is the most important aspect of the education that people need nowadays. Because, on the one hand, if we think of spirituality, there isn't as much depth now as we would like. There isn't always a high standard of insight. So here we want to have that. We want to have a high standard of insight. So we have people who are focused on that. A lot of people come here and are shocked at the depth, at the standard of clarity that we expect. What we think of as merely moderate concentration is elsewhere considered to be full enlightenment. The people who are creating the institutions of spirituality today that are continuing to contribute to our society, for example, in psychotherapy. Well, these Eastern traditions, mystical traditions, have been impacting that for over a century, back from before Freud and Jung, and all the way up until now, and mindfulness is having a greater and greater impact day by day on psychotherapy. That has to be mediated by someone, and it is mediated. It's mediated by a lot of people. But where did those people get the knowledge? Well, they either got it from the source, or they got it from someone who got it from the source. What is the source? The source is places where the deep, true, uncompromising training is happening. It's essential that that not die out, and we're attempting to bring that to life right here. However, we've noticed that psychotherapy, for example, has also contributed over the past 100 years or so to our modern understanding of spiritual practice, that it is important to work through our issues. And that needs to be done on purpose and systematically. We have to be held to account. Well, here we have people who are working on that specifically, and the most important thing that they have here is a community, because the people around us who hold us to account have a larger impact on our behavior, on our patterns, than anything else. This is absolutely clear in my experience. It's been taught for thousands of years, and there's enormous evidence for it in the literature. The people we love, the people we're around, have the largest impact on our path of any influence. And here we are in a community of caring, spiritual practitioners, constantly holding ourselves to an ethical standard so that we all can transform, we can all question ourselves, we can all grow, and through that gain both in the humility that's needed for the transformative practice and the confidence that's needed for the transcendent practice. So both responsibility and awakening are discovered, and as people move through this training, as they enter into, in particular, people begin for the first year or so, which is the length of time that many people stay for. That's the entire length of time that many people stay for. That first year, people are dedicating themselves fully to the transformative aspect, to this rest and heal program. And then, after that period of time, a certain amount of maturity is discovered. They enter into the strive and die program. And for a few years, 3 years or so, they strive for true insight and are expected to achieve it, which often seems so difficult that it may not happen. And yet we continue to hold ourselves to that standard. And then, having achieved a certain insight, whatever that may be, at that time, we take the responsibility to return to the rest and heal and work out whatever problems we see or others see for us to overcome before we ourselves, after this rough, something like 5-year period, we ourselves become an official, an explicit contemplative leader and begin our own community like this, where people can support each other in moving through this whole, complete, full path. This is something that we've developed, we're very proud of, and will become simply increasingly powerful as we have a full meditation complex so that we can offer these forms of training in appropriate spaces. So, for us here, it's our job to dedicate ourselves fully to each of these wherever we are on the path, and to be sure that we have done the work that's needed to be done so that we can become the contemplative leaders of the future.